the chapter 9, control and coordination. So you write down the heading. Basically, we are talking about how the body maintains itself, because we have lot many system inside our body, right? So all the system has to coordinate. So this coordination happens through two main system. One is through our nervous system and another is through our endocrine system. So we're going to study both the system one by one. Before that, let's get into the topic of coordination bit more extensively through these examples of plans. When you talk about your 11th standard sorry chapter, where you study different phylas, जब हमने एक एक फाइला पढ़े थे आपने देखा, as you were growing, like from porifera, you understood a few cells were doing some work, then you had nidaria, and then slowly you had so many phylas coming up, and धीरे धीरे उनके अंदर systems बेहतर बेहतर होते जा रहे थे, right? So the first type of nervous system which we understood was the diffuse type of nervous system, which was actually found in Ctenophora. And the better, or we can say the properly formed or the simplest form of nervous system was obtained in the coelentrates, that was seen in coelentrates, or what you call them, nidarians. पहले उसको nidarians बोलते थे. So if I just write this word, nidarians, nidaria. So अगर आप 11th की टेक्स्ट बुक, you open that chapter of kingdom, animal kingdom, wherein we have different phylums we have learned, we've understood, practicals में we have understood that. So जैसे जैसे हम आगे आगे बढ़ रहे थे, जब हम कॉर्डेटा में आए तो सारी चीज़ें, हर एक सिस्टम बहुत ही अच्छी तरह डिफाइंड कॉम्प्लेक्स थी, right? So when you talk about different system, so every species on the earth have this control and coordination mechanism. अब एक छोटा सा एग्जाम्पल क्लास में जो दिया गया था, like if there is a mosquito bite, automatically your right hand, if there is a mosquito bite on your left hand or the shoulder, your right hand will automatically go and hit the area where you feel the pinching feeling, right? So that's a coordination happening inside your system. Like that, plants also show certain movements. When you talk about some movements, let's listen to this video. This person has really explained it well. Different movements, like you call it as trophism, okay? So when there is movement towards light, रोशनी की तरफ जो movement होता है, sunflower को ज़्यादा देखा होगा, जिस तरफ से sun आता है वहाँ पे they turn. Even if you keep a potted plant, जहाँ से light आ रहा है वहाँ plant का चेहरा हो जाता है. So they actually move towards the light. Then chemotrophic. Chemotactic, it's like when you talk about a simple structure, if this is a stigma, and stigma leads to the ovary, and if you talk about the pollen, this is the stigma and the ovary, and the pollen falls on the stigma. Somebody has to guide the pollen into the sac, right? Into this embryo sac. So it is the chemical produced by the structure, or we can say the female reproductive part is responsible for direction of this pollen tube. So chemical. So we call this kind of movement chemotactic. Thigmotactic is when you are talking about touching, through touch, if there is any response. So let's see this video which talking about some kind of trophism.
But what about plants? Do they move? The answer is yes. Even though it's not as obvious as the animals, plants do move. They also respond to various environmental stimuli. And so in this video, we're going to learn about a particular kind of plant movement which is called tropism or tropic movements. So we'll see what it is and we'll look at its different kinds. Alright, so what is tropism? Tropism is a kind of movement. It's a kind of turning movement. So it's a turning movement towards or away from. So towards or away from what? From some kind of stimulus. From stimulus. So let me give you an example. If you take a plant and keep it in sunlight, you will see as time passes by, the plant will grow and the shoot will start bending towards the sunlight. This is tropism because notice the plant is moving, it's a kind of turning movement, it is moving towards the sunlight. So sunlight becomes the stimulus. So this is tropism. Similarly, if you look at the roots now carefully, you will find that the roots will start moving away from the sunlight. This is also tropism because this is also a turning movement, which is moving away from the sunlight. Let me give you another example. Say you try to take a plant and make it grow horizontally for some reason. You will now see as the plant grows, if you look at the shoot, you will see that it won't grow horizontally. Instead, it will turn up. Again, this is a tropic movement or tropism because it's a turning movement. But what's the stimulus over here? The stimulus over here is gravity. You will see that this thing is always going to grow against gravity. So it's a turning movement away from gravity. And similarly, if you look at the roots, you will find that the roots will again start growing down. This is also a turning moment towards gravity. So this is also tropism. Alright, now let's take a different example. What about the touch me not mimosa leaves? We know, as a child you may have done this, right? Touch me not plant, so you go and touch it and you will find that the leaves close. This is also movement. But do you think this is tropism? The answer is no. Even though the plant is responding to stimulus, you can see that the movement is neither towards or away from the stimulus. It doesn't matter where you touch that leaf, you will find that the leaf will just close. It has nothing to do, there is no directional movement. Does that make sense? Like in these cases. So, this is not a tropic movement. Let me give you another example. This is a Venus flytrap. The moment a fly comes, it traps it. Is this a tropic movement? The answer is no. Why not? Again, because notice there was a stimulus over here, but the movement is neither towards or away from the stimulus. Regardless of how you stimulate it, which direction you stimulate it, it's just going to close. It has nothing to do with, it doesn't depend upon the direction of the stimulus. So again, this is not a tropic movement. So these movements which do not depend on the direction of the stimulus, they are often referred to as nastic movements of plants. So the major difference between these two movements is that tropic movements or tropism depend on the direction of the stimulus, as we saw here, but nastic movements do not depend on the direction of the stimulus. Another difference is that usually tropic movements are growth related movements. We see growth in plants, as you can see over here, and more examples we'll see that. But in nastic movements, we don't usually see growth in plants. Anyways, we don't have to worry too much about nastic movements, so let's get rid of this. Alright, now before we go ahead and look at more examples, let's see how to name these tropic movements. The names of these depends on the stimuli. Okay? For example, over here, the stimulus for that bending movement or turning movement is light or photo. So, these tropic movements are called phototropism. So this is called phototropism. Phototropism. What about this one? What's the stimulus for these turning movements? Well, we just saw the stimulus is gravity, right? So we can call this gravitropism. Some people also call this geotropism, just to keep it simple. So we can also call it geotropism. Basically because gravity comes from Earth and Earth stands for geo. Alright, let's look at more examples. Check out this creeper plant. What do you see? You see that this creeper is coiling around this stem. This is also a tropic movement because if we could see this in action, we would have seen that things start turning and bending around the stem. But what's the stimulus for this? What do you think? Can you pause the video and think about what is the stimulus? Well, notice until it touched that stem, there was no bending here. Once it touched, it started bending around it, it started coiling around it. So the stimulus over here is touch. Okay, based on the touch, this tropic movement happened. Let me give you another example. If you look at the roots which are growing underground, suppose they find an obstacle. Suppose the root of that, one of the roots starts touching the obstacle. Then we will see that the roots will start growing away from that obstacle. Again, we see the touch is the stimulus, and here the turning moment is away from the stimulus. Here it was towards, here is away. So both of these are tropism. So what should we name this? We can call it touch tropism, but the Latin term for touch is thigmo, and so we will call it thigmotropism. Thigmotropism. Another example which I won't draw, which you can explore yourself, is something called hydrotropism. Can you guess what that is? That is movement towards or away from water. Hydro stands for water. So we usually see hydrotropism in roots again. If there is some water somewhere, we will see the roots start growing towards it. Let's look at one more example which can be seen in the reproductory part of the plant. We'll talk about reproduction in great detail in separate videos, but in short, if a plant needs to reproduce, a pollen grain needs to land on the stigma of the flower. These pollen grains, of course, are actually much smaller than what I've drawn. I've just drawn them big so that we can see it properly. Over here is the ovary, which contains the egg cells, and in the pollen grains contains the sperms. And so the sperms need to go and reach the egg. How do the sperms do that? How do they know where to go? This is where the ovary starts secreting some chemicals. So based on these chemicals, you know what's going to happen as this pollen grain matures? Let me zoom in over here. Yeah. So as it secretes the chemicals, the pollen grain, a tube starts growing from this pollen. Right? And the tube starts following, it grows according to that chemical released. It follows it all the way into the ovary. And now that there is a nice path over here, the sperm cells can easily follow into that pollen tube and then go and fuse with the egg. Alright, so let's zoom back. So can you see this movement of pollen tube towards the ovary is also a tropic movement. It is a turning movement, it is turning, and it is moving towards the stimulus in this case. What do you think is the stimulus? The stimulus was some chemicals released over here. Another such example can be seen again in the roots. If there are some harmful substances which release some harmful chemicals, the roots will sense that, and this time they will start growing away from that. So again, this is the turning movement away from the stimulus being some chemicals. So what do you think we should call this tropism? Since this tropism is due to chemicals, we will call this chemotropism. Chemotropism. So these were some major examples of tropism, and of course there are others as well which you can explore.
So we have already started and we understood few things regarding the movement in the plants, like it's mentioned here, these various movements, photo, then chemo, then thigmo. In the textbook, it's written thingmo. It's not thingmo, it's thigmo, Thig. So these are the different types of movements found in plants. We know in animals also there are some movements happening in the coordination with every organisms, and we are understanding that. So the coordination between two different systems makes the balance. Okay, so that balancing happens when you have a proper control and coordination. So two systems together forms the balancing. That is the nervous and endocrine system. When you talk with the slowest or the simplest form of organism, we talk about the cnidarian. Okay, cnidarian, that's the hydra. When you observe a hydra, let's observe this hydra. We are just going to talk about the nervous system in hydra. सो इनिशियली हाइड्रा में ब्रेन नहीं होता, ना कोई स्पाइनल कॉर्ड होता है. अगर आपको नर्वस सिस्टम के बारे में बोलो तो आप लोग क्या बोलोगे, ब्रेन होना चाहिए, स्पाइनल कॉर्ड. लेकिन ये शुरुआत है. जैसे जैसे स्पीशीज़ डेवलप हो रही थी, जैसे जैसे ग्रोथ हो रहा था, जैसे जैसे एवोल्यूशन हो रहा था, so initially nervous system didn't have any brain. So the first organism we are studying regarding the nervous system, it's a hydronidaria. Okay, they had diffused, what is the special quality? Please underline it. Underline this part. Diffused system. They had, hydra had diffused nervous system and the most primitive, सबसे पुराना nervous system था, most primitive early form. ओके एंड ये पहला एनिमल ग्रुप था जिसके अंदर हमने सिंपल नर्वस सिस्टम ऑब्जर्व किया था. तो बेसिकली थे क्या इसके अंदर, नर्वस सिस्टम के नाम पे था क्या? दे हैड सेंसरी सेल्स एंड द नर्व cells, or you call it as neurons. So they had, so in exam you will write a short note on the nervous system in hydra. So the first point you're going to say, it was diffused nervous system, no brain, no spinal cord. It was diffused and the most primitive one, and they were showing the true and the simple nervous system made up of sensory cells and nerve cells. तो नर्व सेल्स कैसे थे? स्कैटर्ड थे. कैसे थे? स्कैटर्ड थे, डिस्ट्रीब्यूटेड थ्रू आउट द बॉडी, इंटरकनेक्टेड विथ ईच अदर टू फॉर्म अ नर्व नेट. आप इस डायग्राम को देखोगे आपको समझ में आएगा कैसे जाली जैसा है. इट्स लाइक अ नेट, नो, नेट जैसा बना हुआ है यहाँ के अंदर डायग्राम्स में, राइट? सो दिस नेटवर्क was formed. So these are nerve nets. सो दो नर्व नेट्स थे, एक मीजोग्लिया रीजन में था और दूसरा गैस्ट्रोडर्मिस रीजन में. सो अपर रीजन इज मीजोग्लिया एंड द लोअर रीजन इज गैस्ट्रोडर्मिस रीजन. सो ऑल यू हैव टू राइट जो न्यूरॉन्स हैं वो कैसे बने. उनके दो टाइप के फाइबर्स थे एंड इनके पास सेंसरी नहीं थे, मोटर नहीं थे. आप लोगों ने 11th में पढ़ा था. Neurons were basically divided into 3 types based on the function, right? Efferent, efferent and intermediate. Sensory, motor and intermediate. अगर आपको याद है तो हमने किया था. So जब एक पिन चुभाया जाता है तो पेन फील होता है, वो सेंसरी न्यूरॉन उसको फील कराता है एंड आपके स्पाइनल कॉर्ड में पहुंचा रहा है मैसेज. फिर स्पाइनल कॉर्ड से मैसेज आपके हाथ पे जाता है, मसल्स में जाता है कि आप झट से अपना हाथ वापस खींचते हो. सो दैट happens because of the neurons. One was sensory and motor. लेकिन हाइड्रा में ना कोई सेंसरी होता है ना मोटर न्यूरॉन्स होते हैं. ओके, दे डोंट शो एनी पर्टिकुलर डायरेक्शन and it is diffused type of nervous system. Now if you talk about the next organism, so nerve net is the very important and the best word for it. Okay,